What's up, everyone? Hunter and Kyle here. Today we're talking about squat mechanics, and specifically one of the least understood elements that is what kind of defines a functional movement in CrossFit. And what that is posterior chain engagement. Now, all that means is the use of the hamstrings, the butt, and basically those major movers to help stabilize our core and squat using those movers. For the most part, CrossFitters as a whole really like to squat and do movements using their quads. A lot of this has to do with body awareness, balance, and quite honestly, just not using the correct movement patterns to get those major movers involved. Even on deadlift days, we see athletes, athletes who round their backs and oftentimes kind of use their quads heavily in this lift. It's just a lack of understanding of how to use our posterior chain. So I'm gonna have Kyle actually demonstrate a couple of squats here, and we're gonna see if we can kind of pick up on the fault that he's making. So he's unracking the bar. Even with just an empty bar, this is fairly easy to see. And I'm gonna have him work through a couple of reps here. Go ahead, stand up, do one. Yep, good. And let's pause in the bottom of this next one. Keep that chest up nice and tall. Now for lots of us, we'd look at that and say like, that's not a bad squat, right? He's got his pushing his knees out, his chest is up fairly high. But what I can tell as an observant coach is that his heels, I can actually see his shoes kind of wavering. And if I said, Kyle, wiggle your toes, he ain't wiggling his toes. You can come up out of the bottom of that. He's not wiggling his toes because he is so shifted so far, his weight is shifted so far forward that he is almost exclusively using his quads rather than his butt and his hamstrings. If you have athletes after back squat day that come back into the gym and their quads are wrecked, but they don't feel anything in their glutes and hamstrings, that's a really good indicator that their squat mechanics aren't flawless. Here is a drill that we can use to make sure that athletes are squatting from the correct position so that they can use their glutes and hamstrings. So I'm gonna have Kyle unrack the bar on his back. And from here, Kyle, all I want you to do is without stepping forward, I'm just gonna have you shift all of your weight forward until you get to the point where you feel like you have to take a step forward. Okay? Okay, so we just found the farthest forward Kyle can get before he has to take a step forward. We obviously don't want to squat from there. Let's do the same thing in reverse. So tip that weight back into the heels. Yep, you can see his toes come up and now he needs to take that step back. And obviously, we're not going to squat from way back there either. But now that you know the extremes, I want you to find kind of the midpoint. You might have to rock back and forth once or twice to find that midpoint. And then I want you to take probably 10% of that weight and go back towards the heels. Now in this position, we can firmly see that his heels are flat on the ground. And if I asked him to wiggle your toes a little, Kyle, I can see that he is able to wiggle those toes. Now, I definitely want his toes dug in and flat on the ground when we go to squat, but this setup here indicates to me that he is now ready to initiate the squat from a position where he's going to engage his hamstrings and his glutes. Okay, so now that he's there, let's work through a couple of nice, beautiful reps. And already we'll notice that the heels are staying flat on the ground, okay? You'll also notice that his knees are not going nearly as far forward as they were in that initial squat. Knees tracking really far forward is another great indicator that the athlete is squatting through their quads, not engaging their posterior chain. Lots of times, coaches, we like to use the cue, sit your butt back, sit your weight in your heels, but we don't understand why we're saying that. If an athlete is shifted really far forward into their toes and we say push the butt back, we're still going to be squatting in our toes. If a coach says sit back in your heels and then we still initiate that squat and go forward onto our toes, we're still not doing this correctly. So again, a really important drill or a helpful drill is to find that balance point, because if an athlete starts in a bad position, they're going to go through their set in a bad position. Find the balance point. Make sure we're sitting in our heels with the feet nice and flat, and then we initiate that squat with the hips back and down just like we do every time we go to back squat.